This time I want to have a little look at just general organic gardening principles, have a look at how these are extended to things like permaculture, and just a sort of general look at what's happening on the different areas that we've been working on so far. I've got this nice picture of a bee because one of the key principles of organic horticulture or agriculture is to work with our environment around us. And I mean, most people are fully aware that bees are one of the most important insects for most of our crops, because most of our crops are fruiting vegetables. For example, tomatoes and courgettes and beans and peas, they all rely on being pollinated um, before the fruits or the edible parts will actually develop and swell. So planting flowering plants, nectar providing plants in the surroundings and through your garden is really important. And to have a good range of different types of flowering plants over different seasons adds diversity and provides nectar for the bees and insects for the birds throughout the whole of the season. So it's worth thinking about the whole of your garden. And I guess it's a very holistic way of growing. We need to consider the interaction between all elements of the environment. Um, I'm going to talk about soil and water and nutrients a little bit later on in this little video. In fact, here's just a picture of, or a little shot of, we use grass clippings to cover our soil. It's a good weed suppressant, and it helps to conserve water, and that's one of the other key elements that we need to take care of in our little holistic environment here. Um, Grass clippings, they don't look great, but they add nitrogen to the soil as they break down. They're a waste product. I mean, you can use them on your compost heap, but if, like us, you have a big area of grass, you end up with too much of this high nitrogen substance to put on your compost heap. Because again, we'll look at this later, but that's about a balance. Um, I'm just cutting it here into these are my beetroot seedlings germinating already, and I haven't watered these. I didn't water them in at all. The soil was moist when I planted, and you really should consider conserving water in terms of once you start watering, particularly if you're just sprinkling the surface, you're just encouraging the roots to spread only at the surface, and what you really want for them is to seek water and grow downwards. So we don't have any mains water at all on our property, and we have to be really careful about what we use in the garden in any case. So we rarely water our plants. We would water in something that's got a young root system, and if it remains really dry now, I probably will go and water my plants. But the main emphasis is on deep watering less frequently than sprinkling every night. Here are my carrots, even they're starting to grow, and you can see they're quite close together, and I'm going to have to thin those out by just pulling out some of the seedlings and leaving others at the right spacing. Alternatively, you can allow them to grow into little baby carrots and then take some out at that stage and use them. It's quite a sort of anti-waste way of doing it. But if you allow them all to grow, they'll be too bunched together, and you won't get good carrots developing. It's the same with those little beetroots that we looked at a moment ago. So when we talk about thinning of our direct sown crops, this is what I'm talking about, making sure that they're evenly spread along the row and not bunched together. You can't really transplant root crops though, because you'll damage the root, and that's the whole point. Um, just We've looked at this a few times, but here we are looking at intercropping between the carrots and the onions. They're good companion plants. So intercropping means growing one crop in between other crops that make good beneficial companions, and the onions here are hiding the smell of the carrots to try and prevent carrot root fly. And really, prevention is the key key principle of organic pest and disease control, because we don't want to be using any products really, even the organic ones are still toxic, you know, that just because they're made of a natural substance, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're any better for the wider environment. So we don't use any at all here, apart from possibly soap. You can use Savon Noir as an insecticide against things like aphids if you get a really bad attack. So I'm going to be developing that far corner bed very soon. That's going to be my bean bed. I'm going to be looking at turning the soil over ready for planting. And what I did was I dug this over in the winter. You can see I've had a little bonfire as well. And I left it really open and chunky. It's really important to get air down into the soil. Because the beneficial microbes and plant roots really need oxygen. And if you rake your soil down too fine or don't cultivate it, then you tend to have a sour soil building up with a lack of oxygen. I much prefer the open ground growing system than a raised bed, because I find it more versatile, and I use the traditional practices of the farming and agriculture that have been around since man's or woman or humankind started cultivating. But I understand that if you have very poor soil or no soil at all, or you can't bend and stretch and dig, then using a raised bed or a no dig system might be a benefit. But for me, I like to cultivate my soil and work with nature's systems of things like crop rotation and using peas and beans and legumes for nitrogen introduction. More about that later. I'm just going to show you here, these are my little coriander seedlings. I'm using them as a little catch crop in between my potatoes. I'm really happy because I had to take the plants out that were bolting a couple of weeks ago. But already I've got some coming along to replace them. More about bean growing in the next video.